众所周知，西方学者看待中国总是带着傲慢与偏见。那么你们知道中东的学者又是怎么看待中国的吗？最近小满就看到一位来自卡塔尔大学国际事务教授在访谈中谈及中国的崛起对中东地区的影响，其中一个比喻让我印象深刻。他说中国就像全球变暖，意思就是你可能感觉不到它每天的变化，它不吵不闹，不搞狂轰滥炸，但当你回过神来的时候，它已经彻底改变了整个世界的生存法则，而且不可逆转。这位学者到底看透了什么？为什么他说中国人的智慧早就降维打击了美国？让我们一起来听听这位教授的看法。
Donald Trump said something very profound in one of his speeches where he said,
That's not usual.
That's not normal. He said that we allowed China to rise.
Mm-hmm.
We gave China access to the World Trade Organization, so they had preferential trade with the rest of the world. We wanted China to liberalize economically. And by liberalizing economically, China will become like us and aspire to be like us, but will live within our global hierarchy. Was Donald Trump being extremely profound there?
Well, I think what he didn't talk about is more important, which is what was the motivation when they allowed China, for example, to join these institutions.
Yeah.
Because they believe with economic prosperity, the Chinese political system will not sustain, will not stay as it is.
Yeah.
And China actually is really phenomenal. I mean, when I remember even Fukuyama in his big book on the fundaments of political thought or something like that.
Yeah.
I read it in the Arabic translation.
Yeah.
At the end of the book, he said, with all of our optimism about democracy, China is still a real challenge because it's a political dictatorship, but it's very efficient, very successful economically. Yeah. And we never predict something like that. So I think, the motivation behind trying to include China was to impact the Chinese political system, which didn't happen. And I think Chinese are smart. They outsmarted the Americans and the Westerners in general.
Yeah.
This is not only the first time, but when also Kissinger and Nixon tried to play China against Soviet Union, China benefited from that, I believe, more than the Americans themselves.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of interested in the Chinese strategic thinking, and actually I'm translating the book of Sun Tzu into Arabic now, and I wrote an article about him.
Yeah.
And I feel they are very deep in their strategic thinking, and they can create common space with others, but they're always able to outsmart others, especially the Americans. They did it in the 60s, and they are doing it now.
Really? So you think China strategically thinks far more deeply and long-term than the Americans do? Because the Americans are hampered by their electoral cycle, the leader who they elect, and some of their leaders could be quite cartoonic in their personalities and their abilities. Like, does Donald Trump have a strategy today about geopolitics? Is that what you're suggesting, that the Chinese system is deeper and has greater depth of thinking?
I think Chinese political wisdom is deeper,
really,
in their strategic thinking.
Yeah.
And even one of the American theorists, he talked about this in a funny way. He said, Russia is like a hurricane, and China is like global warming. Global warming.
Yes, it's slow.
Yes. Russia is violent, superficial. Whatever Russians do, it doesn't impact and will not impact the global system. Chinese are working silently, slowly, but they are changing the whole world. That's why he said, Russia is like a hurricane, China is like global warming.
Yeah.
And I think that's right. Chinese are very patient. I don't think there is any other nation that have that level of strategic patience than Chinese.
So in that explanation, then, Because, of course, when people like Mersheimer talk about challenges to the West, they usually put Russia and China together. But it seems to me that Russia, in some respects, is actually quite superficial as a challenger. And it's really China that's the problem. So then do you subscribe to, I remember there was a book doing the rounds a few years ago in Washington, Graham Allison, The Thucydides Trap. Is America and China destined for war? I mean, do you subscribe to the idea that war is inevitable between these two great powers?
No, I don't think so. I think Mersheimer understands China very well. So the metaphor he's using, I think, is too dramatic when he talks about the Chinese gathering storm. No, that probably is true for Russia more than China. China is not storm. It's a global war, as another American has said.
Yeah.
The rise of there are several interpretations of the rise of China and its implication in terms of relation with the United States. There are those who believe that war is inevitable, like Allison and his book that you mentioned. And there are people who are just telling the West, you have to accept the inevitable. China is the leader of the world today, and you better just adapt to that. And several books of Mahbubani that's his main argument in several books he wrote about the rise of China. And there are some people who hope for or try to theorize some kind of common ground. Like Kevin Rudd, the former Prime Minister of Australia, in his book, The Avoidable War. He believed, the war between the two is avoidable. They can have some common ground. And I think here is reflecting the Australian concern also. Because Australia culturally belongs to the West, geographically belongs to Asia. So they are caught in this crossfire between United States and China. There are several interpretations. Chinese themselves, I find two lines of thinking in Chinese writing on this. Some of them are explicit that we are the new leader of the world. Americans have to accept that. And one of them actually wrote a book, The China Dream. It's like using same terminology as the US. And he's saying it explicitly, just Americans have to accept that. They are part of the past. They are history. The Chinese are more diplomatic. And they're trying to say, no, actually, the rise of China is not a threat to anyone. We just, maybe we can create more balance to the world order, but doesn't mean that, this will affect the importance of the United States or Europe or others. So they are speaking in this kind of diplomatic tone.
But it hasn't always been very diplomatic. I mean, Xi Jinping took over in 2012, and for a period, Chinese diplomacy went through this quite assertive phase. I think they called it wolf warrior diplomacy, named after a famous film depicting China in sometime in the future, who ruled the world. And I remember that China's even like embassies were sending out these very strongly worded tweets that actually made them sound quite like Russians in a way. Is there a temptation in China to see and observe their strength today and to speak in a different way? In other words, are we moving away from this hide and bide era that we saw for the last 3-4 decades?
Maybe experts in China, some experts in China believe that Xi is different from other previous leaders.
Like Deng Xiaoping.
Yes, exactly. Deng Xiaoping, for example, was very quiet, and what he did, you can call it silent revolution. But Xi is not silent anymore, at least in some aspect, some internal discourse. But I still believe that Chinese are quiet. They are investing in the blunders and the mistakes of the United States. And a friend of mine told me that he met one of the leaders of the Communist Party a few years ago. And they told him, who's the man who served China more than anyone else? He said, no. He said it was Osama bin Laden because he kept United States busy for 10 years. So Chinese I think, are investing in the American mistakes, and they believe time is on their side. So they're still quiet, but I think they're smart.
Yeah, I remember in 2016 during the debates between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Donald Trump said a very profound thing, I have to say. I mean, he's not usually as profound. He said, we've been fighting these useless wars in the Middle East. We've spent $3 trillion across these wars. We could have rebuilt our country 3 times over with that amount of money, like China has been doing. And that's really echoing what you're saying there, that these conflicts that the neocons encouraged had really wasted America's blood and treasure.
Of course they did. And Trump said many nice things, but is he able to to translate that into practice? I doubt. I think there are some influence around him. Maybe his heart is with that he want to avoid wasting American money and blood. But I think still there are people who pushing him. For example, the 12 days war with Iran. I don't believe Trump deliberately wanted to participate in that war. And that's why he joined late. If it was an American decision, I think B2 will bomb Iran first, because that's how, logically, in military sense, if you want to attack Iran effectively, the American B2 should start. The strategic bombers should start. Not waiting several days, Iran and Israel fighting each other, and Trump comes just for one night and he said, we destroy everything. And I feel he was drawn against his will to participate in that. Maybe that's what's happening also now. All of this talk about American attack on Iran, imminent attack on Iran. I think I don't believe Trump wants that, but maybe he has to do many things he doesn't want.
So in your article, you talk about how China can provide the Muslim world some maneuverability, some ability to. But of course, there is a concern about China, in, for example, its treatment of Muslims within its border. Uyghurs. There is a feeling that even if China at this stage is trying to cozy up to Saudi Arabia or Afghanistan, when China becomes a strong enough power, it would apply that same anti-Islamic sentiment that it applies on its own citizens when treating the Islamic world. In other words, China would act in a similar way to, say, how the Americans have acted for the last 20 years in the Muslim world.
Well, I think in strategy, you don't care much about the intention, but you care about the action or the interest of the other party. I think China doesn't have a colonial history the way the West have it. They don't have even the colonial expertise, by the way. I mean, unlike, for example, Westerners, whether it's French in North Africa or the British in Asia, for example, and the Middle East. China is kind of self-contained civilization. They felt always self-sufficient. They feel they don't need others. They don't have even a message to convey to others. I mean, they don't do much to spread their language, for example.
Before they established these Confucius institutes,
it's irrelevant. Just see today how many people speaks English here in this street, and those who speak Chinese, of course. It's a big difference. So that's one of the weaknesses of China. It doesn't have the cultural attraction. Their soft power is almost none. And that's good. More important for me, they don't have that strategic infiltration that the Westerners have. The Westerners, because of this strategic infiltration, they play with the internal equation inside our countries. I mean, by controlling few military officers, they can change the political system in this country, and they can support coup d'etat in that country, etc. So if the problem with China, if you have problem with China, at least you have problem with an outsider. But with the West, you have problem with an insider.
Right.
He's fighting you with your own means, using your own people, fighting you on your own land. I'm not saying China doesn't have ambition.
Yes.
Of course they have ambition. And I used to give my students actually of global, international affairs, I used to ask them to watch a Chinese film called Operation Red Sea. It's a Chinese film produced by the Chinese army. They spend a lot of money on it. It's about $77 million. And it's all about, it's like, you know, Hollywood movies that glorifying the American Marines. But this is Chinese Marines this time. And it's very important, you know, when I give it to students, to them, okay, let's watch this film and let's see what kind of message trying to convey to Chinese public, to people in our region, and to the competing global powers like United States, for example. Let's try to get these three messages from the film. Chinese have ambition, and I think they have somehow contained the Asian Islam, we can say, somehow. I mean, China have a strategic relation with Pakistan. They are investing heavily in infrastructure in Central Asia. They are the one who are rebuilding Afghanistan today, for example. They have strategic partnership treaty with Iran. Of course, they have a Gwadar seaport in Pakistan and a military base in Djibouti, etc. You know, you see, they have their own ambition, but I think their way of doing business is much easier on the short term. I don't know what will happen in the future, of course.
这几年，西方媒体天天炒作修昔底德陷阱，好像中美必有一战。但在这位旁观者、这位中东学者眼里，这种担心其实挺多余的，因为中国根本不屑于玩西方那一套零和博弈。就像他最后说的，中国正在做的是一种安静的革命。美国人还在纠结要不要炸伊朗，要不要搞制裁的时候，中国人在干什么？在默默地把生意做到全世界，再把孙子兵法的智慧变成实实在在的铁路和港口。这位学者说，西方人只盯着意图，而他看重的是行动。这大概就是为什么现在越来越多的全球南方国家愿意跟中国玩，因为在这个喧嚣的世界里，只有中国像一个成熟的巨人，不搞那些花里胡哨的民主输出，只问你一句：路通了吗？桥修好了吗？日子过好了吗？所谓的全球变暖式崛起，其实就是告诉世界，中国的好日子还在后头，而那些试图阻挡季节更替的人，终将被历史的风雪埋葬。这波分析，我只能说他在大气层。